So Joe Biden has obviously dropped out of the presidential race, and the Democrats have put the process of replacing him in the hands of insiders and Democratic Party delegates, specifically his delegates, since he won over 90% of them through the quote-unquote primary process. And so here's a little clip of MSNBC. I think this is a funny way to start things off with a little light humor. Here's Jen Psaki describing the process of smoothing out Kamala Harris's path to the nomination.
Now the DNC and the Democratic Party has to run, they're going to run a process, is my understanding. And the process is going to be, the goal of it is to make the vice president look strong and be strong at the end of the process. So that means that's what we're going to see over the next couple of days. We'll learn a lot more about what that looks like.
What kind of a process? I mean, like a competition?
That's a little good.
What kind of a process? I mean, like a competition?
Like you mean like a democratic process?
Like some kind of thing where people vote and earn votes from people? She can't wrap her head around it. Poor Rachel.
She's completely nonplussed by that.
Yes, completely nonplussed by that. And so what does this say about the pro-democracy party's commitment to democracy and their case against the rising authoritarian threat that they claim comes exclusively from the right?
I think your question itself has an answer embedded in that, in the sense that the threat of Trump 2.0 is at the doorstep of the Democratic Party and all their betrayals, which obviously I hope and I expect that we will talk about. But just if only restricting for the present the conversation about democracy, then yeah, it's all just a big sham. In fact, Biden himself became the nominee because he was anointed as such by the Democratic establishment, which essentially shut down the primary process for any practical purposes. And now they're talking about a process because they're trying to square a circle here where they ensure that Kamala Harris is the nominee, but also try to put a fig leaf on top of that by saying, well, we're going to have a process. But then that moment, I'm glad you played that clip, because that moment is a rare moment of honesty, which I think are Freudian slips. That they're not conscious of that. They don't intend to be honest. But that question that Rachel Maddow asked, that came out in a very honest and actual perplexed feeling that she had, that, wait a second, are you actually going to have democratic process? Because God only knows what other forces could possibly be unleashed if you open the process. And I think that is the crux of the discussion of democracy. That's the crux that has to be of the discussion of democracy, which is that the reason they have been throughout, it's not just today or yesterday or last month, but throughout, the reason they have been so anti-democratic in the Democratic Party in their whole so-called process is that what they are most petrified about is any kind of working class agenda emerging in relation to the presidential election year. You know, they saw it in 2016 with Bernie Sanders coming up with his campaign against the billionaire class, revolution against the billionaire class. They saw some semblance of that again in 2020. What's most terrifying to them is that genuinely tens of millions of American working people will be excited by that kind of working class program. And they want to make sure that there is no whisper of such a campaign in the Democratic Party.
Do you think it's that? Because very often, I think they've just completely suffocated that entire movement. Isn't it really like noble houses fighting each other? Isn't it this set of wealthy donors worried the other set of wealthy donors might try to push out their candidate? Like, what left? Do you have an explanation for why, or a speculation on why Bernie, Omar, Cory Bush, they were the most vocal defenders of Joe Biden? It was the centrists who were like, well, you know, he's not looking too good. They were unbelievably devoted to him. Do you have any thoughts on why they in particular?
Yeah, I mean, I think the just fundamentally the reason why you see Bernie Sanders, even Bernie Sanders, I think there's a certain difference between Bernie Sanders and the squad, but even Bernie Sanders and especially the squad, the reason that they have devolved into this kind of, prostrating themselves in front of the Democratic Party elite is because they have, some of them at least, I think, came with genuine ideas of, well, I'm going to do something good. Not obviously, none of them is socialist revolutionaries like myself or many of the people in Workers Strike Back. And the way we run our office in the Seattle City Council for 10 years is completely different than the approach that they have used. But nonetheless, I think some of them came with some good intentions, but that immediately came up against the brick wall of the elite who run Washington, D.C. And unless you have the kind of analysis we have, which is that you can't be party to capitalism or its governing, when you get elected, you don't go there to be the more progressive wing of the administrative apparatus. You go there to disrupt politics as usual. None of them have that idea. They wanted to do do good within the confines of the government. That such a thing is not possible because, as Russell was indicating, the elite have the entire thing in their stranglehold. And so when you come up, when you are a person with some sort of good intentions, you come up against that, but you don't have an analysis of capitalism and how its institutions function and why you need to rally the working class into action and use your office to do that in order to achieve anything. When you don't have that analysis, then it ends up and inevitably ends up in this kind of compromise, you fall down that spiral. And when you start falling down that spiral, it can look like many things. And right now it looks like them prostrating in front of the Democratic establishment. But there's another layer to this as well. And I think that's a good question that Russell was asking, but why is it that people like George Clooney, for example, or the other elite politicians in the Democratic Party actually publicly went out and said Biden needs to go, but then you had AOC and Bernie shilling for Biden. The reason that has happened, I believe, is because when you are genuinely a big business politician or somebody who represents the establishment's agenda like George Clooney, you have nothing to prove to the elite. Everybody knows you're on their side. And when you come out as George Clooney, just to take him as an example, when you come out and say, I am genuinely concerned, Biden is too old, he has cognitive decline, we need somebody else to save the party from this death throes of what's going on, then you are, for the ruling class, for the donors, for the billionaires, for the elite, for the Schumers and the Pelosi's, they have no doubt where you're coming from. It's entirely credible, and it should be because it's the truth. George Clooney is not trying to secretly be a radical. He is who he is. He is who he says he is, and he is who he appears as he is. And so when he says, I need Biden to go, it is taken credibly as from the standpoint of the ruling class. But for AOC, people like AOC, I think they have increasingly felt a compulsion to continue to convince the establishment that, no, you can rely on me. You can rely on me. I promise you, you can rely on me. And I think when you go down that spiral, then you do things that seem absurd to ordinary people. Like, why are you releasing this rambling 1 hour monologue when centrists have come out against Biden? Why do you need to do that? Why can't you just shut the hell up? Well, that's why you're doing it, because you feel increasingly the need to convince them. And I'll tell you, there's another angle to this as well. It's the Bowman defeat. Jamal Bowman was defeated because of exactly trying to play that game where you want to appear like the squad member and so on, just do a few things that are progressive, but for the most part represent the establishment. Well, what happened in the primary? It was the Democratic elite that brought out the AIPAC dollars. It was the Democratic elite that carried out the gerrymandering of his district, because nothing short of a full-throated advocate of the interests of the ruling class will do for the ruling class. So if you try to play both sides, you will get massacred by them. And then AOC has decided that, well, I'm not going to get massacred by them. I'm going to go veer more and more in that direction. I think that's the explanation.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting answer, especially the element of it that when George Clooney speaks, he speaks with the granted assumption of loyalty to management. So he doesn't have anything to prove, whereas they do. I think that's a really interesting answer.
But to what end? Yes, they have to prove themselves. To what end? What are they doing it for? Is it purely just self-interest to keep the cushy job?
At this point, that's what it is. It is self-interest. But I don't think you can understand it in any sort of full way, get the full flavor of it by only looking at it as if, well, she's trying to protect her $175,000 salary or something like that. I'm pretty sure she can get another job that pays that much or even more. And in fact, it's at some point in her video, she goes all defensive and says, her whole video is defensive, but at one point she specifically talks about, well, I'm accused of being a neolib or whatever, but trust me, if I wanted to do that, there are other jobs that pay much more. She's factually right. There are other jobs where you could be very loyal to a destructive and brutal system and the billionaires that own it, and get paid a lot more and maybe get a lot less grief because you wouldn't be, you don't have to be a public figure to do that. Right. However, so what I'm trying to say is that, so I don't think you can understand where politicians like her come from if you only make it about money, because I don't believe it's only about money. It's really about once you are there and once you are, I think, as she is, seduced by the camera, by the public figureheadness of herself, by being a public figure, by having 13 million followers on X, it's all of that is very seductive and very hard to let go of. And so it's not just about money, it's all of that. It's the being in Washington DC, it's being on the news all the time, talking to all these rich and famous people, wheeling and dealing, supposedly. I think she has some delusions of powerfulness also, but wheeling and dealing with Pelosi and Schumer and others. It all, that whole thing is what she's trying to protect. So all of it together, yes, it amounts to rank careerism.
Please clap.